class, so. All right, so I am doing Ex-Mormons. And first of all, I just want to say I know this might be a touchy subject for a lot of you. Some of you might know an ex-Mormon, some of you are Mormons, so I really tried to keep that in mind and try to make it as neutral as possible. Alright, so who are they?
Oh.
That's
a good way to start. Nice picture.
Alright, so an ex-Mormon is someone who was baptized as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church, or called LDS for short. And then they decide at a later date to disconnect or leave. The reasons why they leave, they neither believe in it anymore, or there's actually a variety of reasons why they no longer affiliate, and I'll get into that a little bit later. In contrast, I wanted to clarify that I'm not talking about Jack Mormons when I refer to ex-Mormons. Does anyone know what a Jack Mormon is? You guys kind of have a general idea what that means? Okay, so I pulled up this picture because that's what I thought a Jack Mormon was. Someone who believes in the church but doesn't really live the standards and everything. Does that sound right to you guys?
That's a Jack Mormon.
Okay, yeah, that's what I found. That they actually do believe in the doctrine and everything, but they don't live the standards. So they're also known as inactives. Jack Mormon is just like a slang term. But also on that, I found it interesting that the word Jack Mormon was actually originally used to describe someone who wasn't actually baptized in the church, but was just a friend to a Mormon person. So these terms just kind of change over time, so just keep that in mind. But yeah, I'm focusing more on ex-Mormons who actually leave the church. They don't believe in the doctrine. Oh man.
Control.
Oh,
Control it.
I really wish that we weren't told if Mormonism doesn't work for you and it doesn't allow you to find happiness and peace, then there's something wrong with you. I had really put all of my eggs into the Mormon basket. I really lived it and I fully embraced it, but I wasn't happy. I was losing myself, I was losing my identity, and I found that I was progressively becoming sadder and more depressed. I can't tell you how many times I was sitting on an airplane hoping that something would happen. I just wanted it to be over. And I thought a plane crash would be a perfect way. It wouldn't embarrass my family. And I thought, you know, Kevin, if you give up, think of all the people you might be able to reach and help and be there for them that are suffering in the same ways that you are and need the same type of support, need the same type of answers. That gave me the courage to push on. That gave me the courage to find out why I couldn't have peace and happiness anymore in being Mormon. And I get to do that now. It was worth every drop of effort it took to make this transition. Shortly after I left Mormonism, I realized that I didn't know what I thought anymore. I didn't know my opinions on so many things because I had subjugated my opinions and my thought processes to the church and what the brethren thought. And I saw wristbands that people wore that had WWJD for What Would Jesus Do? I had my daughter make me a friendship bracelet, and she put the letters in a WWKD for What Would Kevin Do? Because I wanted to find out what I thought. And what I learned is that what I thought and what I wanted was good and was loving and was effective. I didn't need someone constantly telling me how to be, what to do, what's okay, what isn't okay, what will make me happy, what won't make me happy. That when I just listened to myself and did what Kevin would do, I became much more loving, happy, effective, and filled with peace. One of the most thrilling moments in recent years was sitting on an airplane. I was flying from Salt Lake City to New York. This was about 2 years after I'd left the church. I realized that I didn't want the plane to crash. It had been decades since I was happy. I sat on the airplane and I just cried. I loved being me, And I was excited about my life, about what I was doing. I had peace, I felt happy, and I wanted to live.
My name's Kevin Millay, and I'm an ex-Mormon.
Alright, so I really like that video because it kind of gives a personal experience of someone who had left the church. And obviously everyone's experience would be different. Some people are happy in the church. For him, he wasn't. And the choice to leave was something that brought happiness into his life. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I kind of wanted to test you guys out and see what your ideas were. Because a lot of people have different ideas about why active members end up leaving the church. So out of these 3 reasons, these aren't all the reasons, but out of these top 3, just try to look over them and see what you think is the #1 reason why members leave the church. So the first one, who thinks that they wanted to sin, meaning they wanted to drink, have sex with anyone they wanted to, or have coffee? Anyone? Okay. Who thinks it's because they ceased to believe in the doctrine? Yeah, 5 people, 6. Okay. And who thinks it's because they were offended by someone in the church? Okay, so the majority of you think it's that one. All right, so, and before I tell you the answer, all my information that I got comes from a survey conducted by whymormonsquestion.org. This is actually a website by active members in the church. And they contacted 3,000 participants on online sources, so former LDS websites, forums, podcasts, and blogs. That's how they recruited their participants. And also these participants had higher than average income and education. The data was skewed towards Caucasians who are middle to upper class. 1,000 had left the church within the last 3 years. Not all of them had actually left the church, so out of the 3,000, the majority had, but some still remained in the church with the title, I guess, being a non-believer. So this data that I found really dispels some of the myths about why people leave the church. And so in this survey, the #1 reason was actually they ceased to believe in the doctrine and theology, which I was shocked too, because I've always heard that people leave the church because they're offended for some reason or the other. So, yeah, I already did that part. But, so, these are all the reasons that people reported. Oh wait, okay. I guess I'm gonna do a second. Okay. So these were the top 5 myths of why active members left the church. So they're offended, desire to sin, never had a testimony to begin with, they were lazy, meaning they stopped reading their scriptures and praying, or they studied anti-Mormon literature. And so what this data did in the survey really dispelled a lot of these myths. So these were 21 reasons why people actually left. And as you can see, being offended by someone in the church and wanting to sin was the very lowest reason. I think it was around 4%. So yeah, out of 21 reasons why people leave the church, being offended and desiring to sin came in at the last 2 reasons. Because these reasons only accounted for 4% of responses, they are not accurate in describing why the majority of members leave. The data shows that great percentages of ex-Mormons actually held callings. This is not right here, but other parts of the survey show that they held callings and were very active up until the time they decided to leave. For example, 73% of male respondents were returned missionaries, and more than 50% of the men and 40% of the women actually served in various leadership positions. This also dispels the myth that ex-Mormons never had testimonies or were lazy. Finally, the last myth that I talked about here, that they studied anti-Mormon literature. That's something I always thought was, that's how they end up leaving the church, is because they read all this stuff. But the data actually shows that respondents first began to doubt by reading church literature, for example, the scriptures, church history, journals of early church leaders, and also church publications. And I think after that point they did start reading anti-Mormon literature, but those were the first things that they actually read. So it was interesting to find out that the top reasons why people actually leave, the most common reasons are historical issues, scientific issues, doctrinal and theological issues, socio-political and cultural issues, and finally spiritual issues. So that was very surprising to me. Okay, so my ideas prior, I was actually pretty biased in a way. When I chose this topic and talked to Dr. Tadahara about it, I had actually left the church only 2 weeks previously. So in a way, I had 2 weeks of experience being an ex-Mormon. And so I had a little slight bias. I was kind of rooting for the team, you know. But really, in my mind at that point, I still remembered all the things I was taught. And since I was a kid, I was taught that ex-Mormons are trouble, and you just need to stay away from them. My parents taught me that they are deceived by Satan, and they're rebellious, denying their testimony that they've had. They taught me that ex-Mormons are hateful and bitter, and I actually have a brother-in-law who left the church 4 years ago. So I had talked to him a little bit about his experience leaving, because I just kind of wanted to know what it was going to be like, how bad it was going to be. And so I kind of knew that leaving the church, you're at risk for relationship deterioration. It just depends on your family and your friends. So after, I have to say ex-Mormons, just so you guys know, they're normal people. I think some can become angry and bitter and blame the church for their deteriorated relationships, but I think it's more of a phase and they eventually get over that. Mostly I think ex-Mormons, they are doing what they're doing because they think it's right and they're standing up for what they believe. And it's not really to disappoint their family. They're not actually just trying to cause drama in the family. They're just doing what they think they need to do to be happy. And I know now that 3 months later, experiencing the things I have, that ex-Mormons are very much at risk, more than I had initially thought. And they're in great need for support. Okay, so briefly, these are a bunch of the risks I just threw out here. Alienation from family and friends, strained relationships, treated harshly, psychological emotional distress, alcohol, drug abuse, discrimination, and isolation. And I'll just go into those a little more in depth, but I just want to say that not all these risks happen to every single ex-Mormon. It just depends on them, really, and their families and their friends and how people treat them. So it's kind of hard to say this is exactly what happens when it's just very different for each person. Okay, so I interviewed a student in the social work department. I won't say who. But she is an ex-Mormon. She left when she was 18 years old. And I just kind of want to go through some of her experiences when she left. She stated, "My mom and grandma flipped out on me. Her family was concerned that she and her son would be ostracized by the community. Her grandma thought she had a demonic influence and never got over it. When a few years down the road, she got baptized in the Catholic Church, and no one in her family came to support her. After some time, her mother came around and supported her at her wedding and her children's baptisms. Her extended family is nice to her, but there is always distance. They all hope she will come back if they are extra nice to her. But at the same time, they stopped inviting her to family get-togethers." She stated that a lot of people thought she left because she got offended, which wasn't the case. Because, in fact, her ward members were always very nice to her. Others said she left to smoke and drink, when in fact she doesn't smoke and rarely drinks. She said she experienced isolation and rejection from family and friends. The neighbors no longer allowed her son to play with their son. She experienced that there comes depression, anxiety, fear of persecution, and paranoia when leaving. The hardest thing was her grandma and mother's initial reaction and anger towards her. Also the fact that her whole world had changed. She realized that She realized that was what she had been taught her whole life wasn't real. It was hard not feeling part of something. To this day, she still has a hard time feeling she belongs to anything. So that really kind of talks about, the isolation you feel, kind of how people might react to an ex-Mormon. And I have to say, when I left, there was a lot of Mormon friends I had that didn't react the same way. So I have to give Mormons credit because I think they're kind of evolving and they're getting more sensitive to people who are leaving. So it just really depends on who you end up talking to. So this is part of the survey that I've been talking about. This guy gave a presentation on it
Welcome everyone,
at UVU, and he just kind of talked about the data and everything, and I'm just going to show you one of the experiences one of the respondents shared.
finding number 11. A majority of respondents indicated that their disbelief has led to high or extremely high costs to their relationships, spiritual or mental health, or employment. Numerous stories that we have gathered in preparation for this presentation help to illustrate the extent to which families have been destroyed over these issues. I will read only one. I was the 5th child in my family to go inactive, 7 children total, but the first child to officially resign from Mormonism. I told my family and my husband's family. We were taken out of wills. We went from being the first choice to raise my nieces and nephews upon a death by will to never being able to raise a niece or nephew if a sibling died. My dad told me that when I announced that I had resigned, he felt like he had been slapped in the face, sick to the stomach. Then my dad proceeded to tell me that I had caused him more pain and anguish than the 6 other kids combined. I have a brother that has fathered 10 kids. He's abandoned 6 of them. Yes, a real deadbeat dad. 3 marriages, an affair, $100,000 in debt. Some of his kids are drug addicts, teen pregnancy. But I have caused more pain than my messed up brother and all my siblings combined. I'm happily married to my first husband. My husband got an MBA at a top university. We are financially solvent. I have 2 children. One of my kids was born with many delays and diagnosed on the autism spectrum at age 4. After many countless therapies, he is 9.5, totally mainstream and just about considered recovered. My daughter is beyond amazing, 4.0 GPA, all-star athlete, beautiful, respectful. She is the dream grandchild, and we get nothing. He didn't see her perform on stage at a university when she was 6, didn't see her qualify or win state, has never come to a concert, performance, or sport meet of hers ever. The 2 years after my resignation, every picture of me was taken down in the house. He couldn't even look at a picture of me, even a baby picture. He just kept hoping that the neighborhood would never find out, and if someone asked how I was doing, he didn't know how to answer. He is just embarrassed and confused.
So that's a very extreme experience, but I think you'd be surprised to hear how common it is. And then also this chart was kind of interesting to me because the survey was about people who were non-believers or didn't believe in the doctrine. But some of them didn't actually decide to leave the church. And I thought it was interesting that the ones who don't believe in the church and stay active actually have a higher percentage of spiritual and mental costs than those who resign or are inactive. And I think it's because when you leave, it sucks at first, but it's over eventually. You kind of get through it. But being active, you kind of have to stay on the down low about your non-belief because you don't want to talk to anyone about it. You don't want people to think that you don't believe. You just kind of want to blend in. So I think you kind of have to carry that load on your shoulders a little bit longer, throughout your life, I guess. Oh, what happened? Okay. All right, and then finally one more an experience. I found this survey. No, never mind, that's a little bit later. All mixed up. Okay, so I found this experience of someone who left the church, but not only was he an ex-Mormon, but he is an atheist. So it's kind of like the double label that is difficult for him. I'll talk about that later too. But anyway, he said, I think it's a little indicative of our relationship to our parents that the church puts more importance on being a member and believing in God than the actual family itself. That's what scared me, thinking that my parents would think of me second to their religion. I think that's what scares a lot of members. They're scared of losing their families. And I think that's kind of brings you back to why people who disbelieve might not leave the church, because it might not be worth it to them to have that strained relationship with their family and friends. Oh, hold on. Okay. I want to get ahead of myself. Okay, so I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I don't think it's very surprising that members would feel the need to disconnect from their loved ones who disaffiliate, because they're taught by past prophets certain things about non-believers. And I'll say this quote is from Brigham Young. That was a long time ago. He was the second prophet of the LDS Church. And I think more recent prophets are not as harsh as he was, but I thought this was very interesting, this quote. If there is a despicable character on the face of this earth, the face of the earth is an apostate from this church. He is a traitor who has deceived his best friends, betrayed his trust, and forfeited every principle of honor that God placed within him. They are disgraced in their own eyes. There is not much honesty within them. They have forfeited their heaven, sold their birthright, and betrayed their friends. So, as you can see, that's a pretty harsh thing to say about someone who leaves the church. And I think depending on the member, what they believe, if they even know about this quote, will depend how they treat the person who leaves. Okay, another risk is drug and alcohol abuse. And I didn't find tons of information on this, like statistics or anything, but I thought this quote was interesting. It said, because of the strict Mormon lifestyle, many ex-Mormons often experience a kind of delayed adolescence once they leave the church, experimenting with alcohol, drugs, and sex. So, I mean, it makes sense to me that for this long time they've been told not to drink alcohol, to smoke, have coffee. All of a sudden they get this freedom, and I think there's a tendency to go a little overboard. But, I mean, I think it's short-lived for most cases, but I think it can develop into abuse. Especially if you're in a state of, oh my gosh, everybody hates me now because I left. I think turning to these things would be more likely to deal with the depression. And then psychological and emotional distress. Does anyone know, have you guys ever heard of cognitive dissonance? Ring a bell a little bit? Maybe, maybe not. All right, so I thought this was interesting because I think this is the process one goes through as they're leaving the church. And let me turn to my quote. Okay, so, cognitive dissonance states that if a person has cognitions that are inconsistent with each other, then they will feel dissonance or negative feelings. This results in the need to alleviate these feelings and change the inconsistent cognitions to remain in a state of equilibrium. Thinking and reasoning are greatly molded by cognitions. Cognitive consistency can be as important as hunger and thirst. When someone is inconsistent in their own cognitions, it proves that they have a belief system that goes against what they thought they knew. This makes them face the inconsistency and reevaluate what they think and believe. This is a stressful experience. Coming to the realization that all you once knew and believed could in fact be false results in shock and uncomfortable feelings. Mormons who begin to have doubts after learning information go through this process of intense questioning. In a way, their world shatters all around them as they seek to discover what is true and how they will react to new information. So before I even knew about cognitive dissonance, I had experienced this. I think everyone experiences it on some level, but it was just more extreme. Just having two different beliefs that clashed with each other. And I had to, you're like in a state of limbo. You don't really know what to decide to do. And until I made a decision, I couldn't rest with this, and it's very psychologically, emotionally draining to have to go through this type of transition. And then discrimination. So okay, let's make it big. Okay, so from that survey, I should have showed this earlier, but of the 3,000 people, this is what happened to them, I guess. This is what they decided. You can see that the majority have become atheist, agnostic, or humanist. And I thought this was interesting. 6% still are Mormon, but they're also atheist or agnostic. That surprised me. The non-believers I was talking about, they're still Mormon, LDS, 16%. Christian, 11%, Buddhist, 2%, and maybe those who are in that limbo still are undecided, unsure, 18%. And so, because there was just such a great amount of people who became atheist, I felt like there's already a lot of discrimination for atheists, and now they have to deal with that and ex-Mormon. Kind of a bad mix. But I found this survey. One sec here. Okay, so a study observed, okay, hold up. Okay. So the study explored the discrimination that occurs towards those who self-report as atheist, agnostic, humanist, and secular. This group is referred to as religious nuns. N-O-N-E-S, not the other one. The study observed that in a family where the parents are a part of two different religions, the individual tends to report more discrimination in comparison to an individual who has two parents who are not religious. The study concluded that one who self-reports as an atheist or agnostic will experience discrimination at school, college, the workplace, and socially, but most discrimination comes from the family. And then I actually found this crazy quote. I honestly didn't know that atheists were so hated. Like, I guess I had no clue. I was shocked. American civic culture puts religion at the heart of a good society. Thus, atheists run counter to what Americans generally think of as culturally acceptable, because they do not, as a group, endorse religion. As a result, they are one of the most despised people in the U.S. today. So that was very shocking to me. So of that, 43% I think that decide to be atheist or agnostic, they just have higher chances of discrimination. And it just kind of sucks to have those labels, but you have to stand up for what you believe in, I guess. All right, so for my interventions and theories, I guess cognitive dissonance is one of those. But I really thought Kubler-Ross applied to this really well. And I didn't really want to talk a ton about my personal experience, but when I saw the 5 stages of grief, I think it really applied, and so this is the only section I'm really going to talk tons about it. So although the Ex-Mormon is not dealing with an actual death, though I guess I could do that. They're kind of dealing with a representation of their own death from the person that they used to be. And for me, I had lived this life for so long that I just had to bury that person in a way. I had to mourn for that person and who I once was. So in my experience, I'm just going to go through the stages. And I'm sure you guys all know denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And so I'm going to kind of go through those in my experience. So at first I wanted to pretend that I never learned the things I did. I said to myself that it wasn't worth it to do anything about what I had learned. I wanted to continue living my life the way I always had. Next, I became angry. I felt like I had been lied to for my whole life. I was angry of all the time I had spent dedicating my life to my religion. I actually went on a mission, just so you know. And only to find out that it was just another religion. Next, I bargained with God to just give me a sign to prove that I was wrong. I just wanted a reason to stay involved in the religion I had given so much to. And when that didn't come, I felt depressed and abandoned. I was in anticipation for the misery that would result should I choose to leave the church. I was very lonely and depressed. At some point, I realized that even though it would be hard, I was doing what was right for me. I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders once I made the decision to leave. I felt like I was being true to myself, and I anticipated that in years to come I would be thankful that I left sooner than later. I finally accepted my decision, and I felt liberated by it. So I think understanding these stages of grief, they work really well when you're transitioning out of any religion. And then the next one is Albert Ellis, REBT. So,
Question.
what?
I have a question.
Yeah,
I don't
go
know
ahead.
whether you feel comfortable sharing, but
Okay.
you mentioned the reasons why people leave.
Mhm.
Why did you leave?
Out of all those reasons, it was the doctrinal and theological reasons. I wasn't offended. I had the greatest ward. It was actually, that was kind of the hard part. Because I was like, oh, I love these people. They're so cool. And once I left, it was like, kind of they distanced themselves from me. So, but yeah, it was doctrinal reasons.
So, have you had your name stricken?
I haven't yet, but I'm going to.
It can sometimes take years to do.
Yeah.
I tried years ago.
When?
Actually, I'll get to that because I did an interview with Sandra Tanner. Any ring bell? Anybody? Okay, well, I'll talk about her in a second. She talks about it. So, anyway, REBT stands for Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, and it's a form of CBT. And I think it's a great option for the ex-Mormon. The fundamental assertion of rational emotive therapy is that the way people feel is largely influenced by how they think. So because the ex-Mormon is so used to thinking a certain way after years of reinforcement and conditioning, it's important that with a new life transition, these thoughts are reshaped to keep the person in balance. For me, it was like, I'm not a good person because I'm not a part of my religion anymore. And so I think you have to go through this process of, okay, wait a minute, these are irrational thoughts. Just because you're not in a religion doesn't mean you're a bad person. So the first step is to identify the irrational thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. Second is to challenge those irrational thoughts. And then finally, you must gain insight and recognize long-held irrational thought patterns. You must realize that you are still a good person regardless of your religion. And this is actually known as the ABC model. If you guys ever wondered where Vigil got that from, this is it. I didn't know that. Okay, and then lastly, there's a variety of online support. I actually printed a support service list for all of you guys. If you ever run into an ex-Mormon or know anybody who might need help, it would have been nice to have this when I left. And then actually, I didn't think that there was any face-to-face support groups anywhere in the community. And then I found the website meetup.com, and they have tons of different groups on there, and I found they call themselves post-Mormons. And they meet like weekly in the Ogden area. There's also one in Salt Lake and Provo. So I'll pass these out at the end, but having these resources is very helpful. And I think face-to-face is the most helpful if an ex-Mormon knows at least one person who understands what they're going through, that can save them a lot of heartache, I think. Okay, so these are the 3 policies I chose. I'm going to go through each one. The first one, it's kind of like the one you were talking about, Utah Code Section 34A. And basically you can't have any discrimination in the workplace because of one's religion. So I'm not going to read that whole book. The next one's freedom of speech. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And I just pulled up this example of how atheists are allowed to say what they want. And American atheists launched Go Godless Instead billboards. So they're attempting to keep church and state separated. And these are actual billboards in Texas. Just giving examples how church is kind of coming back, once in a while into state affairs, and they just want it to be separated. I thought that was a good example of freedom of speech. And then that's another one, which is also a good resource too, when you're driving down the freeway. Then finally, freedom of religion. And at first I'm like, this doesn't apply if you're not going to go to a different religion, but for those who do decide a different religion, they have that freedom, but it also protects those who choose not to belong to a religion. So I think that's awesome also. And then, okay, my potential policies. Whew. Okay. Probably wondering why I have that picture out there. Okay. So I think it's kind of interesting to me that bishops and stake presidents who counsel individuals and families are able to do so without required education. And I think when you think of like priests, they have to have an undergraduate degree, and then they have to go to 4 years of seminary to do what they do. And I'm like, that's 8 years of school. And there's no guidelines. You don't have to have those things to be a bishop or anything. I know that bishops don't do the same thing as priests. They don't get paid for what they do, and they might not have the same responsibilities. It's really different. But I think that if you're counseling families and individuals, you need to have some sort of background in counseling or some sort of education in that area, so you're not saying things that can be damaging to the family. I'm actually going to give you some examples. So in the survey, a couple of respondents said, this one's a female, she said, tell your bishops and leaders to tell their members to not divorce their spouse when they leave the LDS church. My husband was advised by his bishop to divorce me. We had 10 children. It was awful. The church that says families are the most important. You should be ashamed of yourselves. The other one, stop hurting marriages by driving a wedge between spouses on this issue. I have gone through hell and back and nearly divorced. We desperately need a general conference address telling spouses to not divorce an otherwise good spouse over non-belief. I have several friends who have been divorced over primarily this issue, and my own marriage is still on the rocks due to it, even though I'm fully active. So, just things like that. I mean, I don't think all bishops do this, but the ones that do, is like that's why there's a need for some sort of required education in that area. And then secondly, supportive services or resources as one leaves the church. I know I'm not saying that church religions need to be like, okay, good job, here you go. I'm going to provide these resources for you. I don't think that they need to provide like groups or anything, but just like this, a simple little list, of things that ways that they can find support would, I think, be awesome. Instead of going in there and being told all this stuff that you're doing horribly, I think it would be nice if they just said, okay, that's your choice. To help with the depression and loneliness, here's some supportive services that you might want to look up. So that's my 2 policies. And then I went to the Utah Lighthouse Ministry and met with Sandra Tenner. We talked for about an hour. And her and her husband have written over 40 books on the subject of Mormonism. They're actually very controversial individuals. He's actually passed away, but she's still going at it. So she talked to me about what she does for the community, for those who are leaving the church. She actually belongs to like a Christian religion, I'm not sure what one, but she stated that when people leave the church, if they are interested in another religion, there's kind of a cultural shock when going to different places because each Christian religion is very different. And so she kind of preps people so like they know what to expect. There might be a band, it might be very loud, it might be all this different stuff that they've never experienced in a Mormon church. So she tries to help them prepare for that. And then for people who aren't interested in that, she just talks to them about the issues, and she tries to help people who are struggling with the issues surrounding Mormonism by giving them information. So a lot of you would consider her books anti-Mormon literature. Something I liked about her stuff was it wasn't like negative toward Mormons, it just kind of gave the facts and quotes from different prophets and stuff like that. It wasn't like saying negative in any way, it was just actually giving history and information. So what was I going to say? Oh yeah, she talked to me about actually getting your name removed. She actually, people would go to her all the time and be like, how do I get my name removed? Because they would try and the church would come back saying, oh no, you didn't do it right. And so she kept getting all these questions from people, and so she decided, she has her own website, she decided to post or link, no, actually she put it on her website, part of the church's, what's it called?
Policies?
Their policies of how to remove your name. So it was from their book. So she actually got sued by the church for doing that. Yeah, she had to take it down. So she has to tell people face to face now, I guess. But you have to actually send a written or typed letter to your bishop, and it can't be like a formal letter asking to have your name removed. So
It
not
can't be a formal letter?
it can't be a formal letter.
What do you mean by that?
It can't be like a pre-written, like typed up,
Like it has
not
to
your
be
own
your
words.
feelings?
Yeah,
of
it
your
can't
bishop?
can't be someone else's written stuff. It has to be yours.
It has to be handwritten, I'm guessing, right?
So then,
And I think it can be typed. Yeah.
so then they make the decision if they let you remove your name or not?
If you do it the right way, you can get it removed.
Getting it removed, I'm sorry, getting it removed does what for you? What does that do?
If you move somewhere, you don't want people coming,
Oh,
like
because
home
then
teachers.
you go and someone comes and visits you and wants
Yeah.
to know why you're not there that Sunday?
And they
Yeah.
just, you'll be counted as a member of the church.
Yeah,
Oh, so it stops counting you?
yeah, and I think there's probably a lot of people whose names are still in the records who aren't actually in the church anymore.
Has anyone tried, I heard way back, like, when I came out of the closet and was considering having my name removed, that they call family members and tell them that you're trying to leave the church, like church, has anyone ever? I was
I
terrified
don't
that they were gonna call my 90-year-old grandmother
Oh.
and harass her.
Yeah, I don't think they do that.
I've
Well,
not
it
even.
does. It happened to my ex. He, with Prop 8, he decided that he was leaving the church and everything, and so they called his mother and father and his oldest sister, and then he had to have an interview with the bishop, interview with the stake president, and his name's still on the records.
Really?
Yeah, he wasn't able to get it removed. I don't know if he has since then, but
That's surprising.
See, I don't even know if my name's still on it or not. I had the interview with the
Get
bishop.
an official letter.
I-
A friend of mine did, and like 4 years after doing the like official interviews, she got an official formal
Oh,
reason.
well then I guess I'm
Officially
still
removed.
Mormon, guys.
You should have gotten them. You're still a member.
Yeah.
There you go.
Darn
Okay.
it.
They think it must be stuff.
Yeah, it's very hard, obviously, to get it removed. So social worker implications. I think that as social workers, if you guys are going to be here in Utah, I think you need to understand not only the Mormon culture and their